Welcome, everyone. I'm Stefanos Geroulanos. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the director of the Remarque Institute. Welcome to the 2024 Annual History and Theory Lecture, which has been ongoing for at least a decade now, but which is the second one that we're hosting at Remarque. So with apologies to distinguished lecturers like Carlo Ginzburg, Dominic Lecapra, Joan Scott, Martin Jay, Dipesh Chakravarti, and Francois Artaud, and several others, I just really want to declare this a second annual history and theory lecture.
Then you can read the rest in the journal.
Yeah. There you go.
Bracketed.
Well, there, and before you have Ethan Kleinberg, the editor of History and Theory, who is the real powerhouse behind this operation. Ethan, thank you. He and his amazing co-editor, Shazad Bashir, Valeria Lopez Fadul, Courtney Weiss Smith, and Matthew Spector, also with you, also in the second row. You guys were very strategic on the second row. So are working in a time when philosophy of history is underappreciated in history departments in the US and an oxymoron in philosophy departments anyway. So they've internationalized a journal both in content and in reach, massively expanding its importance in the contemporary journal and philosophical and historical universe. So I'm delighted that they're here and that they're working with us to continue this tradition, short-lived as may it thus far be. Thank you all to Sam Paul and to Amy Nguyen and Lauren Betsy, whom you would have seen downstairs, for organizing all the practicalities and the lecture itself. It is my honor also to introduce Johanna Drucker, the Breslauer Professor of Bibliographical Studies and Distinguished Professor of Information Studies at the University of California, Los Angeles. She is a book artist as much as a historian and a cultural critic and theorist, and her book art has been exhibited in museums all over the country, culminating in a retrospective titled Druckworks, 40 Years of Books and Projects by Johanna Drucker. We were just talking about the many 40-year periods involved in her career before, like a few minutes ago. This is not the only one. In some of the other 40-year periods, she has been the recipient of Fulbright, Mellon, and Getty Fellowships, among many others, and was elected last year to the American Philosophical Society. Her academic books include, from 1994, Theorizing Modernism, Visual Art in the Critical Tradition, but also The Visible Word, Experimental Typography and Modern Art. 1995, The Alphabetic Labyrinth. I'm not going to do this for like literally every single year, but it could. The Alphabetic Labyrinth, The Letters in History and Imagination, is the first full-fledged study of the alphabet as a visual embodiment of meaning. From 2009, I'm going to cut this short, Spec Lab, Digital Aesthetics and Speculative Computing. From 2012, a co-authored book on digital humanities. 2014, Graphesis, Visual Forms of Knowledge Production. Then Visualization and Interpretation, Humanistic Approaches to Display in 2020. And from last year, Diagrammatic Writing. She has been an absolute pioneer in the development of digital humanities with several books in that field edited, also including the Digital Humanities Coursebook. Coursebook. Forgive me.
That would be good.
That would be kind of a cool title.
Exactly.
Professor Drucker's second most recent book, if I'm not mistaken, is Inventing the Alphabet, which again concerns what she calls one of the most profound achievements of humankind. I quote because her words are much better than what I could abbreviate. The intellectual imagination required to create a relationship between spoken language and written notation is one of the most profound achievements of humankind. Alphabetic writing differs from pictographs, tokens, or glyphs, for instance, and even early hieroglyphics, because their signs symbolize things, quantities, or concepts. The predominant early scripts in Egypt were hieroglyphics, hieratic, a cursive form of Egyptian writing, and Mesopotamia, cuneiform. In this latest book, her question has been quite a bit different than in the earlier studies of the alphabet. Quote again, who knew what when about the alphabet? And how did the way they knew it, through texts, images, inscriptions, or artifacts, affect their conception of the identity and origin of alphabetic writing? End quote. Allow me a third and a final quote here from her conclusion, because it brings it, let's say, from hieratic and cuneiform all the way to the contemporary stakes, which I think are reflected in her talk as well. Quote, the full hegemony of the alphabet is present in the extensive, subtle, even insidious reach of the computational infrastructure. Even if no deliberate agency motivated this design, The incidental effect has real consequences. The letters do not act, nor does the alphabet, but the integration of alphabetic and alphanumeric systems into the structure of global communication makes the alphabet a hegemonic force millennia after its emergence in a very different set of conditions and circumstances. That's for the ARC. And as you know, her talk today is titled Alphabet Origins, Knowledge Technologies in the Humanities. After Professor Drucker speaks, we'll have a comment by Lisa Gitelman, who's a professor, second to my left, who's a professor of English and also media, culture, and communication here at NYU. Professor Gitelman is a media historian whose research concerns book history, new media, and techniques of transcription. She's the author of 3 books, at least, Scripts, Grooves, and Writing Machines from 1999, Always Already New, Media History and the Data of Culture from 2006, and Paper Knowledge Toward a Media History of Documents from 2014, and also the editor of Raw Data as an Oxymoron from 2013. I love the title. Now, after Professor Gitelman's comment, and if you go on with a bit of a discussion, we'll open it up to the floor. To those of you who are joining us online, please type your question into the Q&A and it will reach me, so I will pose it on your behalf. When stating your question, please introduce yourselves very briefly for those of you in the room. And please note that afterward, we will have a reception in the middle area of the floor here. Now, so thank you both for accepting our invitation to speak and to comment, and welcome Johanna, Lisa, and the audience to Remarque Institute.
Okay, thank you all for coming. Can everybody hear me in the back comfortably? All right. So my title, Alphabet Origins, has the subtitle Knowledge Technologies in the Humanities. And, you know, if you were teaching in STS, you know, Science and Technology Studies, you wouldn't think of separating the history of astronomy or biology or any of the natural sciences from the technologies that enable them. And we know this, right? We know that these technologies construct the object of study, right? This is like a no-brainer. And I mean, it's an oh, wow, when you're a freshman, but it's a no-brainer once you get to this point, right? Okay, but we don't talk about that so much in the humanities. And we do talk about materiality. We talk about it in certain very specialized domains and disciplines like bibliography, book history, design history, media history, and so forth. But there's still within, you know, a kind of persistent sense that we are talking about what when we're talking about the humanities rather than how. And so this talk, I'm taking advantage of this being a history theory context to really do a kind of meta-theoretical presentation on the conceptual framework for this book. Okay, so this book took, well, it didn't take me 40 years. I worked on it for 40 years. Okay, so you know, that's a year for every day, you know, every day of wandering in the desert. Oh no, it was 40 years, wasn't it? Okay, so anyway, and it took that long because it's got multiple different aspects to it. And I'm going to talk about a couple of those today. But one thing is, when I started this work, which really was when I was still a graduate student, and I encountered a certain artifact in the library, in Doe Library, which is basically the closest thing to heaven that I imagine I will ever enter, for all kinds of reasons, my sinful life, among others. But Doe Library, and I was captivated, and it comes in a few slides. And I began to be very interested in the history of the alphabet, but that's a what. And then I started to be really interested in the historiography. But beyond historiography, because historiography, I would argue, and here I'll be polemical to begin with, so we can have some squabbles. Historiography, I would suggest, already assumes that there's a unified object of inquiry. And I don't think that is the case with alphabet studies. And there's no field alphabet studies, right? There's paleographers, there's archaeologists, there's biblical archaeology, there's, you know, all kinds of antiquarian studies and so forth. But alphabet studies as a field certainly didn't exist in 1980 when I pulled this little puppy off the shelf, and which I'll show you in a moment. And so the pursuit of this field led me into inquiries into both a chronology of alphabet studies. When does it begin? Who first actually speaks of the alphabet and its origins? So I focus on origins throughout the book and invention. So who first speaks of that? And in what material manifestation? What is the technology of instantiation? So I will be, so this book really is a history of alphabet studies and intellectual history. I mean, I actually know this field a little bit. There is no other book on the history of alphabet studies. I can guarantee you. There's some very nice bits and pieces in places, but there's no such thing. And again, like think about the history of astronomy. Think about the history of philosophy. Think about the history of poetics. I mean, there's multiple histories of these fields, not alphabet studies. And guess what? Without the alphabet, we wouldn't have global communication, the internet. We would not have computational systems. So again, it's this weird blind spot within the university and within academia and so forth. Okay, enough about that. So, so I'm going to tell two different stories as I move forward. One is going to be this kind of history of alphabet studies. And the other is going to be a set of analyses of the material practices in which alphabet studies becomes instantiated. So material properties, right, and material practices. And I'll be coming back to this multiple times, but just to set up the premise here, you can't just read materiality the way, you know, like there's some inventory of properties that you like go, oh, they're using paper, that means this. Oh, they're using ink, that means that. I would suggest instead that we address materiality as a performative aspect of meaning production, which means that we don't think about it as a set of inherencies, but we think about it as a set of performative possibilities in which engagement takes place. So materiality here is also rhetorical, and I hope to show you that through example. All right, so it's very meta, you know, it's like a meta talk. So there it is. All right, but before we get into the meta, I'm going to give you a little tiny bit of the what, because again, there's always these questions about, oh, the alphabet. You mean our alphabet? You mean the Greek alphabet? And it's like, wrong, wrong, wrong. Okay, so the alphabet was invented once and only once, though it's complicated. It's not like a set of printing blocks got invented and then distributed. But the crucible of alphabet formation is in the ancient Near East. And if you look up here at the top, you'll see Sinai, 1600 to 1500 BCE. And then you see, you know, a set of glyphs. Then you see the Ugaritic cuneiform alphabet, which forms about 1400. You go, alphabet, that's cuneiform. Alphabet is a structural principle, not a set of signs. Okay, then you see Byblos, right? Byblos is on the coast of the Mediterranean, right? It's part of the set of cities that are referred to anachronistically as Phoenicia. The Phoenicians did not call themselves Phoenicians. Okay, then we get Hieratic, Moabite, you know, Aramaic, et cetera, until we come down, you know, Arabic is invented around 200 of the Common Era, right? These are all variants of the same script. We know this by the sequence of the signs, the names, letters, and what's called the powers of the letters, the sounds that are attached to them. The alphabet spreads globally. But here's where it begins, in Mesopotamia and actually in Chaldea. You remember Chaldea, right? Everybody know where Chaldea is? It's right near New Jersey in the ancient Near East. Okay. So, and then we have, but it's really, you know, in this area of the Fertile Crescent and in a cultural exchange between, you know, cuneiform writing to the north and east and hieroglyphic writing to the south and west. All of the alphabetic scripts are affiliated with Semitic languages, which are part of the Afroasiatic language group, of which the Semitic languages are the largest group, but this is all Afroasiatic culture. And it's unified by trade, by all kinds of exchanges, but this is where the alphabet originates and spreads. And guess what? It spreads everywhere. Look at this. You get, you got your proto-Sinaitic up there, 1700. We're going to make that into a problem in a few minutes, but there. And then it spreads. It goes to Greece. It goes into, the Italian peninsula. It also goes into the Iberian Peninsula. We have Old Hebrew. We have it preserved in some ways in Samaritan, which is going to be an interesting case in a second. We have Aramaic, Imperial. And then we have, look, all these Indian scripts, Armenian and Georgian, Arabic, modern Persian, and then the South Arabic scripts and so forth. So, that's it. That's what we got. We got alphabetic scripts and character-based scripts. Now, there were a couple of other writing systems that emerged and disappeared. Indus Valley, Easter Island, Mycenaean writing, that's a whole story. So there are other, scripts that appear, but they're not around anymore. All right, no one is using, Sumerian pictographs at the moment. It might be a revival. Okay, here's the object. I go into Doe Library. What am I, innocent? Well, no, but I go into Doe Library, and this is on the shelf. All right, this is Franciscus, von Helmont's, Mercurius von Helmont's book from what is it, 16, I'll have to find the exact, I think it's 1667. All right. And it's sitting there and it's vellum cover on the shelf in Doe Library. And it's about this big. And I take it off and I open it up and I see these things. And I go, what is this? What am I looking at? And at that point, I was so smitten that I went and put this little thing down on the Xerox machine and made copies. Flat, okay. Crimes against books. All right. So I look at this. What is this? So von Helmont's an interesting character. He was a good friend of Leibniz, among others. Somebody ghost wrote somebody's book in that pair. And but he's in jail for no doubt seditious intellectual behavior. And his father was a Kabbalist. And he's studying the articulatory organs in order to see if the sources for the alphabetic signs might be in the physiology of the human voice. And you can see that it is, obviously. There's the aleph, right? There's the bet. It's right there. All right, but that's just a side story. What's in the crown? What's in the crown? Okay, I can see the modern Hebrew. Next to the modern Hebrew, you see these celestial signs with their little ring letters. That was because the stars are the points of origin for them. And what's next to that? What is number 4? Chaldean letters. And I'm like, Chaldean letters, what are these? So this starts my quest, right? It's like, what are Chaldean letters? And where was Chaldee? Oh yeah, that's where Abraham left from when he went into Canaan. Yeah, that came right into my mind, of course, very first thing. So, but what's the graphical source of these Chaldean letters? Where do they come from? So anyway, that's what got me started. Here are the 8 kind of categories. I'm going to move quickly, I promise you. The 8 categories of material practices through which I, began to examine this, rhetoric of alphabet studies. How do we know what we know? And how did the way that the people who knew it influence their construction of their notion of invention? So we start with text. I'm not even going to read this whole text to you, but this is the text from Herodotus from 440 BCE that is cited by every medieval, Renaissance, 18th, 19th, 20th century scholar, because it is the first eyewitness account of alphabetic writing. 440 BCE, and Herodotus is writing this, and he knows perfectly well that the Greeks did not invent the alphabet. The Phoenicians brought it to Greece. And then the Greeks had to change it. They had to adapt it. There were, new letters required because we have an Indo-European language instead of a Semitic language. But it's, so he's writing this. And this text is repeated endlessly. It's a text. What are the material properties of a text that make it a knowledge technology? What are its limitations and its capacities? It does not instantiate an exemplar. We do not know what Herodotus is looking at. Lillian Jeffrey, in 1961, in her exhaustive inventory of the local scripts of archaic Greece, goes through all of Herodotus's references and correlates her she's a British archaeologist, classicist, and correlates all of her evidence with Herodotus, because Herodotus is taken to be, actually authentic. And he is, and she correlates this. So she can take the archaeological evidence in the 1960s, but that didn't exist, of course, up until a certain historical moment. So the text moves forward, but it's, authentication in terms of what Herodotus was looking at waits at least until the 19th century, but by the mid-20th. So the fact that Geoffrey is still using this is really interesting. And indeed, the alphabet did come from the Levant into Greece, and it came by various routes. It came by, land routes. It came by sea routes. It got distributed, transformed, and changed. And again, the whole story and study of the ways in which these different pockets of, think about the alphabet basically as sort of shower fungus, shower mold. Like it takes root in different places and then it grows into different forms, okay? We'll see more of that in a few minutes. There's another textual tradition, might be as old as Herodotus, but we don't have any extant witnesses for biblical texts before about the 1st or 2nd century before the Common Era, as we know, the Isaiah scroll and the other Dead Sea Scrolls. But the biblical text is another one that has an incredible history to it. And the biblical text is, Moses goes up on Mount Sinai. God gives him the tablets. The Decalogue contains every letter in the alphabet. Moses comes down. Moses gets pissed because family problems, all that golden calf stuff. And he breaks the tablets. What alphabet was on the tablets, people? This question obsesses Western thinkers for at least 2 millennia, right? What was the script? We got to find the script. Well, you can't find the tablets. The tablets are gone. And the Semitic tribes who nomadic peoples who really invented alphabetic forms did not build monuments. There's no library at Nineveh. There's no, palace to discover. There's no pyramids. You'll see what there is in a few minutes. So the quest to find the alphabet that was on the tablets is another obsession, because guess what? The Bible doesn't show it either. There are no instantiations, no exemplars. There's a second Bible story. It's not really a Bible story. It's in Josephus, so it's, apocryphal. But the second story, and here's Josephus himself, and the story is Adam on his deathbed decided that he should tell his son Seth to go and record everything that Adam had taught him and, record it on a pillar of brick and a pillar of stone, right? We know this story. Okay. And so then Seth dutifully, here in this graphic novel where we see 2 positions for Seth, is going out to do his father's bidding. Now, there's a little problem here. There's like a little separation, a little time lag between Adam and Moses. And if Moses got the alphabet from God, what was Adam telling Seth to do? So this becomes another whole set of debates. And needless to say, Renaissance scholars, 18th century scholars, they're all looking for the pillars because nobody broke the pillars. So they might still be somewhere able to be found. Okay, so this sets up a whole other set of things, but we don't have any writing. We do not know what Seth might have used. So the textual traditions do not have exemplars, no graphics. Then we have a graphic tradition in which we have no texts. Oh, that's interesting. All right, so there's a whole bunch of different angelic alphabets that have long histories, celestial scripts and so forth, and we can deal with those. And they get transmitted largely as specimens. All right, the celestial scripts do get used for incantations and so forth. But then we have others like angel alphabets or the alphabet of Noah that are only exemplars. Exactly what are they? We have Adam's alphabet, which you'll see in a minute. But we also have exotic scripts. And here's one of the most famous of the exotic scripts here at the top. This is an alphabet that Ethicus Ister, the mythical traveler to the East in the 7th, 8th century, brings back with him as a sign that he was really there, right? Like what is better evidence that you were in the East than that you bring back an alphabet, right? A script. Okay. you know, and so here's this alphabet. Alamon, Betcha, yeah, and it's vaguely, you can see, it's, you know, this script shows up in medieval manuscripts all over Europe. Now, it's never used for texts. It's not like you can take a book that's written in the Ister alphabet and extract the alphabet from it. So here again, a technology. What is the technology? It's graphic. It has to be seen to be copied. Because I could describe this alphabet to you, you know, if you're sitting in another room, and how many years do you think it would take before you actually got to the Ethicus Ister alphabet in graphical terms? There are two ways to copy graphics. One is to look at each letter as a picture and copy its form. The other is to know the ductal sequence of strokes. All right. The ductal sequence of strokes is expert script, right? But these are copied and we see them here, and you'll see it. It's here at the bottom. There's Alamon, Betcha, so forth, right? And this is a 12th century manuscript from Germany, and it shows up in the British Isles, right? And it shows up even in the, I can never pronounce this, the Bitefirth manuscript, very famous manuscript, 11th, 12th century, intact, copied. That means somebody is seeing these and copying them. So the material of graphics has its own life and circulates differently from the text, right? So it's really interesting. And we will see these come back. And the interesting thing about Ister, and if you're interested in following this, René de Verlet, the great runologist, is the source. They traveled with the runes, in other words, in terms of like being copied. So that's also interesting because they weren't runic scripts. So the next of the kind of, so text has no exemplars. Exemplars can exist without text, all right, but they have to be copied and they have an intact lineage. They come forward into the present. I mean, there's those purple and silver sites online where you can still see the Ethicus Ister alphabet. Okay, you know those sites, okay. If you study the alphabet, you do. Okay, next technology is the technology of the compendium and the chart. Now, Cornelius Agrippa, 1533, is the first person to put together a graphic compendium of alphabetic scripts. There's none in the incunabula period. Believe me, I've looked. The handwriting masters, Palatino, Arrighi, and so forth, have some interesting scripts, but they're right at the end of the incunabula period. So this Agrippa one, and this is very interesting. Look at the group that he has put together here. Astrological signs, Hebrew, Syriac, Greek, and Latin. Now we're going to look at a bunch of different charts in the next couple of minutes. What is the rhetoric of the chart? It's not simply a convenience. It is making an argument through its structure. And the argument is these things are comparable and equivalent to each other. Now that works fine for the letters. What's with the astrological signs? Okay, I mean, it's very interesting. And again, Agrippa, fascinating, you know, figure and so forth. But we get the first of these compendia. Now, another figure who puts together a compendium is Guillaume Postel, another Kabbalist and one of the people who captures the celestial script. And you can see it here on the left-hand column of the right-hand page. Those are the ring letters. But on the left, what you're seeing is Samaritan. Postel actually is stationed in the Levant. He is the first European to get a copy of a Samaritan script. And the belief at this point, this is 1538, is that Samaritan is the original script. There's a sense that perhaps because the Sumerian Pentateuch has a continuous lineage, and the Samaritans themselves have a continuous occupation of their lands, that maybe Samaritan was the original language, original script on the tablets. So the question of antiquity, very difficult to determine at this point. No archaeological evidence, none. We have a Samaritan script, right? And Postel is so excited to get this copy, and it introduces all kinds of jealousies in the community of scholars and so forth. But you'll see the Samaritan, but you also see, so the Samaritan's on the outer edge here, and then you see these lines along the edge. And we're going to come back to that because this is the beginnings of Paleo-Hebrew. And the other thing to note here are these coins. These are Hasmonean coins. This is the first recorded instance of copies of Hasmonean coins. So for those of you a little vague on Hasmonia and its moment in history, this is Maccabean, right? This is again recorded history. And we're seeing this, what is essentially Paleo-Hebrew script on these coins. So now we're starting to get a little bit of evidence. And I put this in just to show you the set of comparisons. I won't dwell on this at great length. Now, another interesting thing is, again, this kind of crazy collection of compendia that occur in the Renaissance. This is the 1590s, and we get this figure Angelo Rocca. All right, so here's all of the variations of alphabets right here. And if you start to read through these, I took one piece and pulled it out for you. That's Adam's alphabet. That's Moses's alphabet. That's Abraham's alphabet. And this is the alphabet of Esdras, right? Of I'm sorry, what's his name? Who is that? I'm trying to think of the modern name. Ezra, right? The scribe. Okay, so these are on here, all equivalent to each other. There's no distinction made at this point between these mythic alphabets and actual scripts that are, and I call actual scripts those that are used for writing text. So these mythical texts continue to show up in these compendia. So this is also very interesting. Rocca has free reign of the Vatican Library because he puts together a bibliographical index of the Apostolica Vaticana. At this point, the Vatican Library still has in it medieval manuscripts with angelic scripts. They get purged, all right, because they're assumed to be affiliated with dark magic practices. That comes a little bit later. 1616, not too long after Angelo Rocca, we get this magnificent thing. I'm showing you just the top of it. It's James Bonaventure Hepburn. He happened to be the keeper of manuscripts at the Vatican. Please, nice job to have if you are interested in extracting esoteric material from the history of writing. And he puts this thing together. It's 72 scripts because there are 72 sacred names for God, right? He puts together 72 scripts. And if you start looking at these, you'll see Chaldean, right? Angel alphabet, super celestial alphabet, and it goes on. So again, these compendia of scripts as exemplars are put together. So again, here we have a graphical collection of scripts. In many instances, we do not have any of the manuscripts from which these materials were extracted. We have only these compendia to use as a moment of intellectual sort of history. Okay. And again, these things continue to come forward. This is Richard Heichflud, purchases Pilgrims from 1625. It has a whole set of these exotic alphabets from celestial to runic. And, these are, this is only 8, 9 of the scripts that he has, a whole huge collection. Because again, here what's being shown to you is a sign of authenticity. This shows you that, these are actual texts from antiquity and from the East. So exotic here equals authentic. But again, they have to be seen to be copied. And just to show you how far forward this comes, this is one of my great favorite books of all time, is Edmund Fry's Pantographia in 1799. Now, this is an amazing work because it's also a kind of last, it's like an imperial statement, right? This is a Brit who is, putting together every known script, and he happens to be a punch cutter. And he happens to cut the punches for all of 300 scripts, and the matrices and cast the type. It took him 6 years. There are about 300 scripts. Do the math. One a week. Why not? Got nothing to do. And, 18th century England at night, and winters are long. So you get a lot of steel and cut some little things from the end of it. Okay. And we're back to the Chaldeans. Now, one of the other really important things about Fry, and this is sort of a subtext that I haven't pulled forward yet, is that writing in 1799, Fry is writing just on the edge of the sort of insight into geologic history, So the age of the earth is still really considered in biblical terms. There's little inklings. Buffon's got some ideas, and there's other folks around. But basically, we're still talking about biblical time span. The other thing, so Fry frames everything in those terms, but Fry is also this generous giver of information, so that everything he cites, he gives you the source and the page number. All right. Okay, everybody, here's a race. I want you to find Duret, page 119, and you can go to the Internet Archive and figure it out. Well, Duret is one thing, because there's not that many Durets, all right? You know, so you get to Claude pretty quickly in his compendium. Try doing Dr. Morton, you know, and figure out which Dr. Morton is that. And of course, because they're Brits, are all named Charles, William, Henry, or Robert. Okay, but anyway, the Chaldean script. Here we're back to the Chaldean, right? And here's, again, these alphabets have come forward intact. And here's Fry copying this, cutting a metal punch for it, because, you know, all those Chaldeans are eager to be able to print their books. And, you know, read this, right? Theseus Ambrosius, you have to track him down too. You know, this is the character that was brought from heaven by the angel Raphael, right? Who gave it to Adam. Now we're getting a little clue about where Seth was educated, right? And so forth. But some authors pretend that Moses and the prophets used this letter and so forth. So again, you're getting this wonderful cultural history, right? And one of the kind of key tenets for me, because I love Fry so much and von Helmont and so forth, was to completely respect the cultural otherness of the past, to understand that these are full understandings and explanations within a technologically replete, you know, sort of material instantiation. And there's nothing missing from this. It is all there. Fry was, for me, one of the, I tracked down every source in Fry to understand, you know, what he was drawing on. So I'm going to switch now and kind of move through the last couple of these technologies. So I've talked about text, I've talked about graphics, I've been talking about compendia, and I'll say a few things about charts, because charts have multiple rhetorics to them. And this is where, again, I say material is not simply an inherent property, it's an argument structure. And so here's another of these charts. This is not too different from Agrippa, but this is our buddy Athanasius Kircher. If there's a topic, Kircher's got to write about it. You know, I mean, he can't help himself. So here's the tourist Babel chart. And again, look at this. We've got our column 3, celestial script, right? The ring letters are there. Then we get this character that he's calling, you know, Samaritan, and it's Paleo-Hebrew. And you will remember that from Mercurius von Helmont's crown, right? And, you know, then this and then we get the Arabic, and they call it Syriac, and then, you know, the modern Hebrew. So again, here's Kircher. This is, you know, Kircher's putting all of this together to understand the relationship. What's the rhetoric here? The rhetoric is, again, similarity across languages and scripts. All right, this is a unifying vision, a unifying argument. Now, there are many problems with charts, which you'll see in a minute, and that is the glyphs are deracinated. We have no idea what the source is for each of these letter forms. We don't know the location from which the letter forms were derived. So we don't know the materials in which the scripts were made, and we don't know their size. So in other words, a lot of fundamentally significant information is missing. And yet the fact that Kircher could put this together is still remarkable. Willem Gorey, you know, how many years later? Yeah, basically a decade later, you know, does the classic, you know, intellectual ripoff. He says, hey, that, you know, that chart's good. I like that. And he just takes, you know, the tourist Babel chart and sticks it into a narrative form. And this is also really interesting, because what's the rhetoric here? Suddenly we are getting an entire scene, right? We've got a vignette. We've got a costume tableau. We have our shekels, right? We have our figure here. We got, you know, I mean, the whole scene is now set. So the chart has been embedded in a kind of phantasmatic situation. So that's also really interesting. So the charts go on, and we'll see a few more in a few minutes when we get to the paleographers, because they're going to use charts in a different way. Not only just for a set of equivalences, but to indicate progress, location, development, and so forth. But the next sort of major material intervention is with the antiquarians. So the mania for antiquarians among gentlemen in various places, England, France and so forth, developed really largely in the 17th century, and early 18th. So you get this fantastic work by Bernard de Montfaucon, right? Antiquity Explained. This is a monument, like, it just boggles the mind, right? Giant folio. Bernard de Montfaucon has the means and réseau social, right? the network, to go to every curiosity cabinet and collection that he can find in Europe. And he is looking for evidence of biblical history. He's also looking for other antiquities. But in his introduction, he makes this argument for materiality. He says the material of antiquity has in its instantiation information that cannot be remediated. You must see the object. That's pretty good, right? And so, but also the thing that's driving him and many others is they want some authentication of biblical text. There's nothing. There's really nothing, okay? A few Hasmonean coins are not going to do it, okay? Because that's already the Roman period. And so he goes and he looks and he looks, and there's almost nothing. And he says this also in his introduction. He's brokenhearted because he cannot find evidence in support of the biblical texts. So this is, very real. You got to just take 1 second and look at sun. Sorry, I'm getting the view and you're not. So, just happened to come with, looking for biblical evidence. Other people had looked for evidence that would support biblical history. And of course, they look in the Sinai. And Richard Pocock, Inscriptions from Mount Sinai, again, early 18th century. There had been other travelers to the east looking for this evidence. But again, there were no monuments. What there are is in the Sinai, scratchings in the rocks. Pocock, again, has some means. He's got, some equipment. He sends some folks up the rock face to make rubbings. And they produce this incredible set of plates of Sinai inscriptions. Anybody want to read this for us? Exactly. So you see the problem. It's not just that we need evidence, we need to be able to read it. And to read it, you don't only have to know the script, you have to know the language. What language is it? Is it Nabatean? That's a late Semitic language. Is it Aramaic? Is it Samaritan? Is it what language is it? So we get this evidence, but again, it's something's there, but what? I said I would show you a few more kind of charts. This is, again, one of my great heroes, Thomas Astle from 1784, keeper of the Tower of London. He also had access to some real nice libraries. And here what you see is, again, the amount of evidence that Astle has to work with by contrast to Kircher, right? Kircher had one instance of every script. Now, when you get to Astle, this is Hebrew, Phoenician, or Samaritan. It's actually all Paleo-Hebrew and Samaritan mixed in here. But he's got multiple instances of these glyphs. So now the chart is beginning to be a comparative study, not just a set of equivalences. So the rhetoric of this is different from the rhetoric of simply presenting equivalence. All right. So Astle is much more of a kind of modern thinker in that sense. And then we have this breakthrough. Okay, so we've been doing compendia, we've been doing charts, we've been doing antiquities, and now we get archaeological evidence. Archaeological evidence for the first time, 1855, in Sidon, on the coast of the Mediterranean. And if you remember, we're not going to go down this rabbit hole, but remember what's going on in the Levant at this period with the breakup of the Ottoman Empire, and the French have come into the coastal cities and so forth. So there's a person attached to the French consulate who thinks, well, there might be some treasure here because Egypt has inflamed the European imagination forever. So the idea, and the palace at Nineveh had been discovered and so forth. So it's like, maybe if we go down into some caves, we'll find some treasures. So he goes out, he sees a hole in the ground that looks like a cave, and he says, well, it must be something down there. He's looking for gold. He sends somebody down, needless to say, he doesn't go himself. And they find this. So what is this, right? This is a basalt sarcophagus with this incredible inscription in it. I didn't pull up a detail of it, but if you look at the details of this, this is a sophisticated Phoenician script. This is so elegant, so perfectly done that it shows there are centuries of training of passing this on. This is, I mean, plus it's chiseled in basalt. I don't know what your, kind of chisel handwriting is like, but mine's bad. All right. Like somebody asked me recently, why do you think hieroglyphics didn't catch on and, alphabetic script did? I said, have you chiseled any hieroglyphics lately in sandstone? It's not exactly shorthand. Okay. So this gets found and brought up, and, the French have found, and they go through all kinds of negotiations about who can have it, who should have it. And so, but they take copies of this that circulate around Europe, Great Britain, and America. Albany, the Albany Historical Society has a Semiticist. And within weeks, this is front page news on newspapers because the text can be read and it actually references biblical texts in the history of Eshmanasar, who is the king and his lineage. And this is mind-boggling. This is like, there's actual evidence in the homeland, right? The original site. So this is the first real archaeological object. It gets taken to a boat, a French boat, in an ox cart, bedecked with flowers, to be taken to a French collector who eventually gives it to the Louvre. It's still in the Louvre and whatever. But it's, this is amazing. So archaeological evidence means that we have located the script in geography. That's an amazing transformation. And the geographical aspect of alphabet studies becomes increasingly important as we get into paleography. So that was your mini archaeology. Now you get your mini paleography, and then we'll have a wrap up. So the mini paleography, the Semitic epigraphy is not as old as Greek epigraphy. We don't have, that lineage in history, but Semitic epigraphy really starts to blossom in the end of the 19th century because now we have enough evidence to do it. And the amazing Mark Lidzbarski puts together an exhaustive study of Semitic inscriptions. And if you look at this, this is Phoenician, this is, the writing table of Phoenician. And if you were to look at this up close, you would see that he is telling you the artifact from which the glyph is taken and where that is from. So this, again, is a whole different use of the chart. The chart then becomes a real sort of data structure, right? A spreadsheet in which we can see, more than just comparison. Comparison is still there, but he's using it as an instrument of study. And that's also really interesting. And here you can see some of the, Old Phoenician, Middle Phoenician, Punic, and so forth. And one of the other things that he begins to do a bit, but which is more important for contemporary paleographers, is he looks at the orientation of the signs. This is also significant, right? So it's not just what does the sign look like, but which direction is it facing? When does that become consistent, and so forth? So there's so much to process. These charts get used for all kinds of purposes, not all of them quite as intellectually rigorous as Lidzbarski. So our friend Ignatius Donnelly in 1882 is showing you the alphabet of Atlantis in his chart. And it's interesting because he actually compares it as well to the Mayan, because Atlantis and Mayan cultures, they were connected by subterranean drains. All right. But at the same time, we have the wonderful Isaac Taylor, whose 2-volume The Alphabet is another one of the really serious, intellectual contributions to the field. And then later in the 1920s, we get the wonderful Lawrence Waddell, who has decided that the Sumerians were actually Sumer-Aryans, and that the alphabet emerged as an Aryan invention. I don't have to go into detail here. You can read the subtext pretty clearly. All right. But again, it goes on and this doesn't end. All right, as I'm coming to the end here, I want to cite a couple of other just sort of intellectual moments that are significant. And this is going to pull together the geographies, the biblical history, and physical evidence. And that is the work of William Flinders Petrie, Egyptologist, very renowned Egyptologist, and his wife Hilda, who gets the credit here. And they are on a diplomatic mission going from Cairo to Jerusalem. And they have to get there, and they get there through what's likely or not the Exodus route, right? And so there they are going along. And again, this is still part of this quest. And Hilda, as they're pausing in the camp, looks around. She goes, hey, I think I found something. And she finds this. This is amazing, right? This is a sandstone sphinx. It's not very big. It's in the British Library British Museum. For some reason, it's not on display. I was there last summer and very annoyed that I couldn't see it because I've seen it before. But a sandstone sphinx, and it has an inscription on it. This is the inscription. It's an inscription in Semitic language, but it has nothing to do with Israel. There is no state of Israel in 1700, 1500. It hasn't come into being as a nation. So, and it's a hymn to Baal. And it's in the Sinai Peninsula. So who's there? Why are they there? What does this archaeological location tell us about the distribution of the early alphabet? And in the end, it tells us that there were Semitic workers who came to work. There was the, various other mercenaries who migrated through there and so forth. So, again, location, script, language, and purpose of the script. Petrie has a very interesting theory, which I find fascinating because the date of publication was 1912. So we're talking right around the beginning of structuralist linguistics. And so, and he writes about what he calls the formation of the alphabet. So rather than thinking about alphabet as a set of signs that simply circulates, he looks at alphabetic scripts around the Mediterranean and has a thesis that the alphabet consolidates through this distribution into its final form. He's wrong, but it's a great thesis. All right. I mean, but that's fine. And again, chart, but location. All right, almost at the end here. And so just at the point when it started to feel like, there was some sort of sense of where the alphabet had originated, where it was invented, how it emerged and transformed, these two researchers, John and Deborah Darnell, were in the Upper Nile at the curve near Thebes in Wadi El Hol, and they found this inscription. And this is also a Semitic inscription. And suddenly it's like, oh, this is on the continent of Africa. We are no longer talking about the Sinai. What is going on here? How do we account for the existence of this inscription in this place? There's not very many others. And again, there's so little evidence. I mean, compared to cuneiform has hundreds of thousands of material pieces of evidence. There's like maybe 3,000 to 4,000 inscriptions in the Corpus Semiticarum. So it's really small. So I'm going to close with 2 slides. This is one. And again, I have nothing against Matt Baker, who put this together, but this particular kind of chart is, so misleading. And the idea of evolution in a kind of linear form, as if it goes from that ox head, which whatever, to, Phoenician to Greek to, it's so much more complex, so much more diffuse than that. And Western Semitic, Northern Semitic, Southern Semitic, epigraphy, all are nuancing the specifics of this in the work of people like Benjamin Sass. And if you notice at the top of Sass's chart here, there are numbers, and that refers to the Corpus Semiticarum and the identity of every inscription. And these inscriptions are studied down to the last teeny tiny little stroke. And this will be my last slide to make this point. This is an inscription that was discovered in 2018. Calling it an inscription is already kind of it's just a tiny, tiny little potsherd. All right, it has 4 partial characters on it. And analyzing this potsherd put into place a missing link between the sort of 1700 to 1500 period and the later 1100, 1200. And this is dated, I think, to the mid 15th century BCE. One little potsherd. Looking at, I mean, I don't know how your paleographic skills are, but, don't ask me to tell you how to read those signs, right? And Sass, Finkelstein, these figures, they look at the length of the stroke, the crossbar, the shape of the bowl, the orientation, everything, and can then, say where this fits within these lineages. So that is an argument from forensics, right? It's forensic evidence, archaeological, paleographic. But it claims a certain kind of authority that is taken away from this. And this is my point again, that I would give equal authority. I would argue that there is a forensics in this cultural history that has equal validity to the kind of empiricist forensics that is found in the potsherd. And that, part of what I was trying to tease out in looking at these different technologies as from a constructivist perspective is to respect the ways in which the relationship between evidence and understanding took place. So that's it. Yeah, the thing.
Microphone. Okay. Okay, my head is exploding. Thank you, Johanna, so much. And I should say right off the bat that I have not read by any means everything that Johanna has written.
I haven't either.
Sometimes she writes 2 books a year. Now that she's retired, I'm worried that there's going to be an acceleration and she'll soon write faster than I can read. But I have read a few of her works, including this new big, beautiful book. And so, and then I have a few thoughts just drawn from it more than anything else rather than about it. But I did want to say that when I think about Johanna's work, I kind of clock in the obvious virtues of just incredibly rare erudition. A writerly grace that is accompanied by a precision that we do have to call bibliographical, right? And is exceptional in that regard. And a kind of compellingly Catholic, I think, small c, interest in visual knowledge, right? Or in an epistemic zone, maybe where the verbal and the visual, or where different forms of meaning both distinguish, but also are distinguished, but also a but and a braid. I've also come to admire Johanna from the few works that I've read as somebody who just loves a kludge. That she maps out these huge terrains while admitting rather than pruning eccentricities that forever readjust the frame, right? So her wholes are adjusted by incongruent parts requiring considered intrusion of amendments, sidebars, pocket lists, diagrams to produce the big picture argument. So I guess I'm thinking most specifically of Graphesis and maybe of this big book, but a few of the other shorter speculative things that I've enjoyed as well. So A is for alphabet. I won't go through the whole thing. B is for but wait. I got stuck at the beginning, and I should say I had the honor of reading this book in manuscript and again just last weekend. I got stuck on the alphabet. Part of a disciplinary hazard I learned from the book itself, since media studies and related domains have into the immediate present clung to what Robert Logan called the alphabet effect, a bizarre ideological commitment to the superiority of alphabetic writing, its specious Greek origins, and its supposedly determining force in such developments as, say, democracy or abstract rational thought. Big problem. I mean, I think it's great to be generous with thinkers of the past, but I'm having a hard time with the thinkers of the present in this regard. And it's
But I
shocking.
criticized Logan.
Yes, I learned about this from you completely. It's also shocking what a large footprint this kind of thinking has continued to have. So Bruno Latour, for instance, near and dear to my heart, that famous paper about visualization and cognition goes into this whole thing about how non-alphabetic writing has limited China's power and growth. C is for crackpot. C is for correction, D is for Drucker. So I'm going to say a few of the things that Johanna said in slightly different terms, and then I'll have one more example of a kind of tool or a how of knowing. The alphabet of Johanna's title, she writes, is a construct, an object constituted by intellectual inquiry. So an object, and not the object. Its singularity is resting both on its single point of origin and in the abundant, long-lived, swerving, and contradictory proliferation of attempts to understand that origin that you just heard about and seen. So history is a tangle, historiography required. I think I might, put it a little bit differently. I might sort of call this historical epistemology, right? Tracing the ways that inquiries and their objects are forever co-produced. As we've heard, in a nutshell, ongoing inquiries into the origins and development of the alphabet over the course of centuries, conceived and reconceived what the alphabet is. They also arrived at a consensus finally, and you saw this on one of the last slides, that alphabetic writing arose among Semitic speakers in a multicultural context in the ancient Near East and spread from there, proliferating and evolving variations. So if we call this an invention, it's emphatically not the romantic version of invention we've naturalized, light bulb over the head, geniuses working their magic on the world, but something much more interesting, kind of a germination, if you like, amid the soil of human differences. I mean, I think that the diversity of that context of origin is the key point. But to return to historical epistemology just for a sec, and the co-production of objects and inquiries, some of these inquiries coalesced over time into modern disciplines, obviously. One must think of bibliography and historiography, hooray, and of media studies, mea culpa. Johanna obviously also considers disciplinary gestures of many different scales. So we heard about tabulation, we heard about collection, compilation, comparison. And she writes compellingly of the modern disciplines of archaeology, diplomatics, paleography, and epigraphy. And I just love the idea of epigraphy so much. I'll say one more thing about how it came to be modern. And this is to invoke a version of historical epistemology in which we have to take the tools, the how into account, the what into account, as well as the social organization of the production of knowledge. So epigraphy was made arguably modern, it turns out, partly via the hubris of 19th century scholars in Europe seeking compendia of all known inscriptions. The key here, in some respects, was social organization, but another key was a new tool. For epigraphy, Lorraine Daston tells us it was the paper squeeze. I'm very fond of paper technologies. The paper squeeze made all the difference. It's a facsimile image of a carved surface that was made by banging moist paper into the inscription, letting it dry, peeling it back, rolling it up, and sending it back to Berlin or wherever. I appreciate the paper squeeze, as I said, because I'm, obsessively interested in paper tools. But also, I think now for the way it unexpectedly takes us back to that epistemic zone where word and image, or the verbal and the visual, where the text and the graphic meet up. It's sort of, I think of it as the earliest history of the page image, if you like. And it's that zone too where the individual written characters obviously reside, the A's, the B's, pick your favorite letter or character. But thank you. I'm sure we want to engage Johanna in questions, and I could start, but thanks.
Thank you, Lisa.
Well, I think Pocock, I don't know if
Yeah,
you
go
did
ahead.
robbings or paper squeezes, but paper squeezes, as you know, do come into the relationship with the archaeological evidence. So it's great. Of course, it only works on an incised surface. It won't work on like the pot shard. I don't know if they're preserved. I mean, that'd be an interesting thing to track down.
That I don't know.
Yeah, I don't either.
it was, you know, revelation to me. I think I read this in Destin that photography, no good when you're looking at inscriptions.
Need raked light.
Can I ask you to say a little bit more, because you both started and ended, I think, with your most, your grandest abstract claim about materiality as performative. Is there a way in which your sense of that changed in the course of this project?
Yeah, well, yes. And again, I would say that the easiest example to use to demonstrate that is the charts. That at first I just thought, oh, they're charts, like all tables are the same, right? It's columns and rows. So things are the same or they're different across one set of grids. And then I came to see that the argument being made by the chart could be progress, evolution, similarity, difference, whatever. So there are a lot of different arguments that the same apparent material structure made. So that was sort of where that clicked. So, you know, it's just, I mean, the concept of materiality, as you know as well, because this is an area where we
The
overlap.
word materiality, Johanna, the word is making me crazy.
It gets overused all the time. And, you know, but when I have to say, when I started, again, back to, you know, grad school in the 1980s, and I was trying to formulate a theory of materiality as part of the production of semantic value in literary texts, there was precious little theoretical material to work with. And, you know, I went through the whole sort of modern theoretical corpus, and you got plastic and plasticity, you got late 19th century aesthetics, right, where there's a whole discourse on materiality, right? But it wasn't engaged with semantics. It was, you know, was different. And, you know, the one instance in the semiotic literature that you could find to talk about a material aspect of semantics was in Roland Barthes. He's talking about the white and the black, you know, sort of chips that are used in Roman, looking at, you know, for, you know, making decisions or sorting lots. And it was like, you know, so there wasn't any discourse on materiality at that point, except in cinema. And that's really where I got it, because my dear and wonderful dissertation director, Bertrand Oakes, was really a film person. And he just hammered us all the time with the materiality of the signifier is what makes cinema modern. But again, what did that mean? Like, so this is where, again, shifting from a kind of generalized invocation of materiality into, you know, a sense of like, how is the material participating in the production of the discourse? Not, oh, it's materiality. And I won't pick on my people that I like to diss in this particular domain. You can imagine who they might be. But the point is that that's why I shifted to the performative concept to say it's how the material enters into the production that we want to ask. And again, we all know this from pedagogy. Everybody wants to read through things to the what. You say, but how? How is it being? Like read the, you know, read the way the work is working. What is the work that is being done by the material? Not just, oh, it's material. So, you know, so I've watched the way the word has crept into banality.
From as a distinction from virtuality, no doubt. Right? The virtual gave us all permission to talk about the material.
Well, in certain realms, that seems to have been a particular plague, but you know, I have yet to encounter anything virtual that doesn't have a material. But I don't know. Light, it's sound, it's projection, it's haptic, it's tactile, it's is the but I believe the ether is material, so you know.
Ethan, as a first question, I'm happy to take
Oh.
more.
So I want to ask about one of those, well, the charts or the forms, which makes an argument, and I think that's a really interesting aspect. But I want to put it in conversation with another set of charts that are occurring from sort of Scaliger on,
Oh, yeah.
which is the attempt to do something, if not similar, that's working parallel about time. and temporality. I mean, you could talk about a synchronization, but it also butts up against this sense that the biblical time might not be quite right. Puts enormous pressure on how to reconcile multiple times that seems to be commensurate with the same eagerness to reconcile multiple alphabets. And whether, I mean, if you could riff or if you thought about this relationship between the attempt to sort out time, chronology, periodization, so oftentimes to have a kind of evolution of which is the one that we should land on in relation to what seems to be a similar project going on with the alphabet, at least as it sort of unfolded in your talk.
Yeah, no, I mean, I know those chronologies quite well, and you know, they're very, very detailed, right? And you know, they go down to, I mean, I forget the boyfriend of Queen Elizabeth who's put into prison, who was the great sailor, and he does the huge chronology while he's in prison. It's not Roger and it's not Robert, and you know it is. Raleigh, okay, thank you, Walter. Okay, so it's Sir Walter Raleigh, and you read through that chronology, and I mean, it's like every single day that Noah is on the ark is recorded there, and the weather, and guess what? It rained. And, you know, so they're highly detailed. And again, you know, Usher's chronology is, of course, the kind of definitive chronology, Bishop Usher, and it gets replicated in the King James Bible editions up until, I don't know, the 19th century. But the sense that it's biblical chronology is so deeply sort of like, you know, sunk into, you know, sort of shared scholarly awareness that when Newton does, do you know Newton's book on the chronology of ancient kingdoms amended? Now, Newton knew a little bit about something, okay? And so he had a definite sense of time. And even must have had an inkling of cosmological time. But he goes back through, I think he's correcting Usher, I forget the details, but he goes through and does his own book called The Chronology of Ancient Kingdoms. And he says, Usher is wrong, he is off by like 4 days and 3 hours. Shocking. And, you know, so again, it is a similar project in the sense that it's an attempt to come up with a comprehensive system, right, that will actually account for, you know, knowledge within a single unifying frame in the Western cultural perception. And so again, this stuff gets thrown off as there are encounters with, you know, cultures whose chronologies and temporal systems are different and distinct. Oh, you know, if that's the way that's done, then, you know, it's like, you know, because the Babylonian systems are well known and begin to be fully understood. And it's like, so, you know, so yeah, the chronologies, I think, that there's a kind of attempt at comprehensive understanding. Attempt to model.
Is there a sequestering of the outside sorts of, like, so I'm imagining what they're trying to do with Chinese time or with the realization of something, which leads to a sort of having to renegotiate how those would fit in to this other, what should be the dominant understanding. And whether you get the sort of same sort of sequestering or attempt to argue out other alphabetic possibilities. Perhaps the Chinese alphabet or.
Well, again, Chinese isn't an alphabet, it's a script, and that was recognized, you know, I mean, Charles Reiki, when he goes, you know, Father Reiki, when he goes to China, goes back to Europe, I mean, there's a complete fascination with these writing systems. And Chinese, like hieroglyphics, has a place in the European imaginary because there is this conviction that this is a direct writing, that it represents thought, and this inspires, you know, universal philosophical language systems particularly in the 17th century, but also the tradition that von Helmont is part of, which is there an articulatory physiological basis that would be apparent, that would be self-evident? And then that inspires a whole bunch of linguists and phoneticists to try to come up with a script form that would be a kind of direct writing of the voice. So, you know, so there's many kind of really interesting ideas about writing and inscription and notation, not just, you know, what they represent, but how they might function. Goes back to the performative. So would there be a way, you know, to teach and to teach, you language directly through the eye. And again, you get someone like Bishop John Wilkins, who developed an entire script. Yeah, so other Wilkins fans here, an entire script. And he's not the only one. George Delgarno, I mean, there are people who are working with, the challenge of transcription for the deaf and how to make an articulatory alphabet. So there's all kinds of really interesting innovations and interventions in script form. But Chinese and hieroglyphics remain, and it's, an imaginative inspiration. So you get something like, the Hypnerotomachia polyphili, right, where you get these, pseudo hieroglyphics in there. Writing they get from us. But it's, so no, I think, these historical projects are running parallel and inform each other. And then you get Gene Sutton.
Right.
Thank you.
Jesse.
Please identify yourself.
Jesse
Yes.
Erickson?
Hi. Wonderful. I love your work. So getting back to the esoterica element, which relates, I think, going back to Elizabeth, I think of figures like John Dee and upwards through the sort of appropriation of runic scripts in the early to mid 20th century as a divinatory system. Thinking of your examples of angelic alphabets, agreed by others, that weren't used to draft entire text in codex form to transmit knowledge in that way, but were possibly used, as you said, in incantations, other examples, alchemical formulas, things like that. Could you speak to perhaps the ways in which the epistemic systems are different and how the instantiations of those alphabets, even though they seem fantastical on the surface, have some level of functionality that perhaps speaks to non-traditional forms of meaning making and knowledge production that would have been more familiar to audiences within their social context?
Sure. It's a great question, Jesse. One of the things so the esoteric and exotic alphabets, the scripts, these esoteric scripts, they really fall into several different categories. The celestial scripts, the ring letters, they actually were used in incantations. And, even, when Nineveh is excavated, they find, instances of their use in 3rd and 4th century of the Common Era. So they have a longer history to them. But something like the Adamic script, the one that I showed you where Theseus Ambrosius says it was brought by the angel Raphael and so forth, those are never used for anything. They only are used for exemplars. So they don't have that. So we could ask, what is their kind of cultural, sort of resonance in that way? And I think they function, I think as you're sort of suggesting, as a kind of sign of magic power and a sign of authenticity. So there's a kind of semiotics to how they function, but they aren't ever actually used. All right. So the knowledge that inheres in them is as a kind of testimony to a belief that the angel Raphael really would have brought a script to Adam. All right. So, and that's a completely legitimate, right, sort of argument. Right? It's, yes, of course, like how else would that have occurred? And here's the evidence of it. And then in the case of the runes, again, they have, actual histories in their evolution in the, beginning to, about 2 millennia ago. And then they become kind of appropriated in various ways. And this also goes to a whole number of other discussions that adhere to this, which have to do with various moments of kind of nationalistic fervor. When people decide they're going to discover a kind of authenticity of national identity. And there's a kind of Celtic version,
L1,
there's a
yeah.
Germanic version, yeah. And so the runes play a role in that kind of activity as well. And then, you know, they get appropriated for, you know, divination and magical practices. And again, the ring letters are the ones that also get used for, you know, various kinds of inscriptions in Hebraica, and they show up. So it's interesting how different these all are in the sense of that they will show up in something like, you know, James Bonaventure Hepburn's 72 scripts as a compendium, but they've gotten there by very, very different routes. You know, one came by bus, one came by, you know, one was dropped from, you know, a parachute, and others have been on the ground for millennia. So, you know, so they're really interesting in terms of their differences. So it's, you know, I think you're really sort of pulling that to the fore.
So, front and then Alex Caput. I think these are the last two.
Is the Rosetta Stone a chart?
Stephanie?
Is the Rosetta Stone a chart?
No, the Rosetta Stone is you know, multiple translations. So it's not a grid.
But doesn't it, oh, so it has to be a grid to be?
Well, when I'm talking about charts here, I'm talking about a grid. So I mean, you can use it for correlating, you know,
A kind of different kind of
meaning.
performativity, it seems.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And the other thing I want to ask you is, do you see machine learning is helping you at all once we have this increased amount of data about languages and?
There was just a kind of breakthrough story last week about reading some of these, you know, fossilized burnt papyri from Herculaneum using AI techniques. It's still very labor intensive, but, you know, anybody who doesn't know these things are like, you know, rolls that were burnt and, you know, in Herculaneum in a volcanic, you know, eruption. And you can't unroll them, you can't do anything. They're just solid, you know, but there's still layers. It's like if you imagine taking phyllo dough, rolling it up, burning it in your oven and burning it underground under some lava for a while. Okay, and then taking it out.
After you wrote on it.
After you wrote on it, exactly. Yeah, that's what these things look like. And so that was a big story last week.
Yeah.
Yeah, really cool stuff. So, no, I mean, you know, the bots will help us with everything, right? So, well, I don't think they're gonna help us with flossing.
No. It's just that I was interested in you saying how that whole technology is maybe not polluted maybe in a way, but by this alphabetic structure that we get. And so I'm just saying, how did you feel that it would influence what they find?
Well, you know, I mean, you know, systems perform according to the models that they are scripted with, and then there's a certain amount of bootstrapping and emergence and so forth. So the question of, you know, how far beyond the humanly programmed model a system goes is an open question. But we know. Look, the great thing about automated systems is they do things at scale. So, you know, there are things that can be done at scale that give us information we can't, you know, that a human can't. But it's human.
So we're not to worry that it's all the same alphanumeric encoding, so to speak, underneath all of it.
Well, of the things I'm worrying about at the moment, undoing the alphanumeric substrate of global
Or
communications.
perhaps multiplying the forms of encoding.
Well, thanks for the note of anxiety. Appreciate it. There was one last question, I think.
Thank you so very much. And maybe it's a good last question. So what about the alphabet that we all use today and work with? Would you describe this as permanent, as fixed, or is it still like in flux? Is something what's happening in the world of the alphabets as we speak? Or if it's fixed, since when has that been the case?
You know, I mean, again, script forms continue to emerge, right, and evolve. And again, given, you know, different kind of language groups and sub-language groups and revivals of lost languages and so forth. But, you know, I mean, again, it's a question of the chronological scale, like how quickly do things change. But, you know, I think, you know, one of the things that, again, people send me all kinds of stuff. And, you know, somebody recently sent me a very interesting project. That's a digital project about letter forms that morph. And they morph to inflect meaning. And so the concept of inflection within letter forms, whether it's for affect or for emphasis or for play or for whatever, you know, it's like that's a technological capacity that's present in, you know, handwriting. But it hasn't really been part of print culture because, you know, you cut those metal punches or something about how permanent they are. And so, you know, I think, the question is, what is written language for? And if part of what we're trying to do is use it for, you know, affective communication as well as other kinds of communication, then the letter form's capable of communicating something in a way that hasn't been part of certain standard script forms. So that's one thing I see. That's occurring. You know, and it's like, how far can you distort a letter until it's no longer recognizable? And if you know who Donald Knuth was, so Knuth's a very interesting figure, a mathematician who was interested in letter form design, and in part because as a mathematician, he was having formulas set in his books and having all kinds of difficulties with this technically and intellectually and so forth. So he decided that he was going to design a system and all letter forms would be able to be described by a single algorithm. An A would have certain properties, a B would have certain properties, C and so forth. He said, okay, now how hard can this be? 52 forms maybe, right? And what he came up against, and this is really Douglas Hofstadter's read of Knuth, was that there's no essential A, there's no essential B. That these are, again, part of a semiotic system in which the B has to relate to the A in its script, right? And be differentiated from that within a particular font or writing system, but there was not an inherent A. And so that was a really interesting insight in terms of what these forms are. So, you know, kind of goes back to the changes in development. Well, I think, as they say, nothing stands between you and a glass of wine with me, so.